Sometimes the world decides your fate before you even take your first breath. Jamal Rivers never had a chance. Born in the roughest part of the city, he learned two things early in life. The world wasn't fair, and survival came at a cost. His father, gone before he could walk. His mother, working 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. His neighborhood, a war zone where dreams died before they even started. Jamal wasn't stupid. He knew the odds. The system wasn't built for people like him. It was built to keep them exactly where they were, trapped. By 16, he had already seen more pain than most people see in a lifetime. By 18, he was in handcuffs. Wrong place, wrong time. One minute, he was walking home from a corner store. The next, police sirens were screaming, flashing lights painted the streets, and a cop was slamming him against the hood of a car. You fit the description. Those 4 words would change his life forever. A witness, a mistaken identity, a system that didn't care. Before he even understood what was happening, he was standing in front of a judge, wearing an orange jumpsuit, hearing a verdict that crushed the last bit of hope he had left. Guilty. They didn't need proof. They didn't need evidence. They just needed someone to blame. And just like that, Jamal Rivers, the boy who once had dreams of something bigger, was sent to prison for 10 years. He sat in his cell that first night, staring at the cracked ceiling, listening to the distant echoes of men who had already given up. He felt the anger, the pain, the injustice. But most of all, he felt the fire. If the world had already decided he was a criminal, then fine. He'd prove them wrong. Prison was supposed to break him. Instead, it made him unstoppable. While others spent their days counting the years, Jamal spent his days counting the pages. He read everything: business books, law books, economics, psychology. He studied the system that had stolen his freedom and vowed to beat it at its own game. He watched how the guards moved, how the prison operated like a business, how money dictated everything. And then he saw his opportunity. Inmates were struggling to write legal appeals. They had no one to fight for them. So Jamal became their voice. He started helping prisoners write letters to the courts. Then business plans, then resumes. Men who once saw him as just another inmate now lined up outside his cell, waiting for advice. And slowly, something incredible happened. Jamal Rivers, the kid the world threw away, had become the most respected man in prison. The warden noticed. The lawyers noticed. And one day, a billionaire businessman named Charles Whitmore noticed. He was touring the prison for a charity program, shaking hands with officials, when he heard about the inmate who ran the prison like a company. At first, Whitmore laughed. A kid running an operation in here? Yeah, right. But then he met Jamal. And in 5 minutes, everything changed. What do you want to do when you get out? Whitmore asked. Jamal didn't hesitate. I want to build something. I want to create opportunities for people who never had a chance. Whitmore saw something in him, something rare. And so, he made a promise. When you get out, call me. 7 years passed, each day a slow crawl toward what felt like an inescapable fate. Jamal had learned how to survive in prison, how to navigate the system that had stolen his freedom. But deep down, he refused to accept that this was how his story would end. He had spent every waking moment educating himself, preparing for a future he wasn't even sure he would get. Then, one day, something unthinkable happened. A lawyer, a young woman fresh out of law school, came to visit him. She sat across from him in the cold, sterile prison meeting room, her eyes filled with something he hadn't seen in years. Hope. Jamal, we have reason to believe your case was mishandled. At first, he didn't react. How many times had he heard those words? How many times had someone given him false hope, only for it to be crushed by the unyielding reality of the system? I'm serious, she continued. There's new evidence. A witness has come forward, someone who was there the night you were arrested. They were too afraid to speak back then, but now they're ready to tell the truth. The air in the room changed. For the first time in years, Jamal allowed himself to feel something other than anger, other than the crushing weight of injustice. Could this really be it? Could this be his way out? The process was long. Appeals were filed, hearings were scheduled, and the fight for his freedom was reignited. The judge who had once looked down on him from the bench, reading his fate like it was already written, now sat across from a defense team armed with undeniable proof of his innocence. The evidence was clear. The conviction was wrong. And then, finally, after 7 years of stolen time, the words he had dreamed of hearing echoed through the courtroom. This court finds that Mr. Jamal Rivers was wrongfully convicted. All charges are dismissed. He is free to go. He should have celebrated. He should have smiled, cheered, felt the weight lift from his shoulders. But as he stood there staring at the judge who had once sentenced him, all he could feel was exhaustion. They had taken so much from him. 7 years of his life, 7 years he would never get back. And all it took was a few words to undo it? As the prison doors opened and he stepped into the daylight, he wasn't the same man who had walked in. The world had moved on without him, but he wasn't going to let that stop him. In his hand, he had nothing but a bus ticket and a scrap of paper. A number. Charles Whitmore's number. He hesitated, his fingers hovering over the phone. What if Whitmore had forgotten about him? What if the promise had been empty, just another polite conversation, a moment of kindness that meant nothing in the real world? But then, he took a deep breath and dialed. The phone rang once, twice. Then, "I was waiting for this call." 1 year later, Jamal stood in front of a set of massive glass doors, staring at his own reflection. The man looking back at him wasn't a prisoner anymore. He adjusted the cuffs of his tailored suit, ran a hand over his freshly cut hair, and took a deep breath. He had walked into plenty of buildings before, courtrooms, prisons, parole hearings. But this was his. With Whitmore's backing, he had built something real. Second Chance Ventures. A firm that wasn't just about money, it was about people. People like him. People who had been thrown away, forgotten, written off as lost causes. He wasn't just running a business. He was rewriting the rules, hiring former inmates, teaching them how to build careers, funding small businesses for those who had never been given a shot, giving men who had nothing the one thing the world had never given him, hope. Within 5 years, Second Chance Ventures became one of the fastest-growing organizations in the country. Corporations that once rejected people with criminal records were now partnering with him. The media wanted to talk to him. Politicians wanted to hear from him. But Jamal didn't care about all that. He cared about the single father who walked into his office, nervous, just like he had been, hoping for a job and walking out with an opportunity. He cared about the young kid on the edge of falling into the same trap he had, but this time, someone was there to pull him back. And one day, standing in the very boardroom he had built, he finally let himself smile. The world had tried to break him. The system had tried to erase him. But he didn't just survive. He won. Because sometimes the greatest revenge is proving them wrong. And Jamal Rivers, the boy they once locked away and left behind, was now the man shaping the future. They tried to break him. They tried to silence him. They thought his story was over before it even began. But Jamal Rivers didn't just survive. He won. Because sometimes the greatest revenge is success. And now the kid who once sat in a prison cell, wondering if life had already passed him by, sits at the head of the table, running the boardroom.